The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson. Hello and welcome to History Jackson, the home of accessible and digestible history. And welcome to our Chalke History Festival special series, where we'll be talking to some of the historians, living historians and performers here at Chalke about what they're doing at the festival and their work. Now, Chalke History Festival will be covered comprehensively through History Jackson, be it on our social media, our blog, and our podcast. So if you wanted to check out more and learn more about what's happening at Chalke, do head to the links in the description below. Now, without further ado, I'll leave you to our Chalke History Festival special series episode. Hello and welcome to the Chalke History Festival special series here on History Jackson, and we're joined by Honor Cargil-Martin. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Now, we've been together for the last hour. You've just been in a talk in Speaker's Corner, talk about your new book, Messalina. How did you feel about the talk?
Yeah, it was great. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I find it quite weird to ask you about a talk where I was interviewing you, but it was really fun to talk about your book in a different way to what we have been doing today. Yeah. So, in terms of, I'm not sure how to approach this, but in terms of reviewing the talk, how did you find writing Messalina? Because I'm trying to bring different questions to you this time.
I really enjoyed writing Messalina. I think she's a character that I loved, and I loved sitting with for the probably year and a half plus edits that it took me to write it. She has this amazing combination when you actually start to look into her story of kind of salacious anecdote that is attached to her name, and then actually very kind of significant, interesting, and historically impactful political activity. So there was a lot to kind of keep me coming back to her. And also, apart from Messalina herself, the period in which she's living, the kind of height of Rome's first dynasty, the Julio-Claudians, is such a fascinating, brutal, incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, but also incredibly cutthroat world to be looking at, and it was a fantastic place to kind of spend some time historically.
I can see how much you enjoyed writing this book. Now, what does Messalina tell us about this period of Rome?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons that I chose to focus on Messalina is I feel that she's a fascinating figure on her own merit, but she's also a brilliant case study for this period of Roman history. I think because she is it really kind of encapsulates what it means to do politics under the empire, where all power is concentrated in the figure of a single man, and all of your political impact comes from your access to the emperor himself and your ability to kind of create a network of influence for yourself within the court. And Messalina does that incredibly effectively. And I think even the sort of salacious, crazy stories that are attached to her, and some of them are pretty insane, I think are really testament to the extent to which people are scared of the influence that these women are coming to have behind the scenes, and they're looking for ways to discredit them.
And reading your book, I thought she was incredibly cunning and smart in the way that she did it. Now, listeners to the podcast, the person screaming, this is part of the ambience of the podcast, but the person screaming is completely fine. They weren't hurt, but they are currently doing a live, weird performance over there. But you've also done another talk today about writing history. What was that discussion like in a way? Because you're from one period of history, being a classicist, and someone was writing from a slightly more modern perspective than yours.
I was doing a panel discussion with a fantastic historian called Rachel Cockerell, whose book Melting Point is about Jews going to look for the promised land in Texas at the beginning of the 20th century. And it was really fascinating because we were talking about the struggles that we both had with our source material. And they really are almost entirely opposite. She had this huge kind of corpus of source material to work with. And when you're doing ancient history, the problem is really that you have so little. I had 3 main sources that talk about Messalina. And those sources, you have so little to kind of assess their veracity with. And they're clearly very biased. That's evident when you're reading them. And they're clearly using the history to construct a narrative that they want to be kind of compelling in a literary sense. And so you're very aware that there are kind of prejudices and biases at work, but it's quite hard to always specifically assess what those are because of the dearth of other information. You can do it a bit with material culture, and you can do it a bit by just sort of starting to get a real sense for who those historians are, what they're interested in, what they're really anxious about. But that's really the constant kind of struggle with writing ancient history. And it's awful and frustrating in a lot of ways, but I think it's also a really fascinating process because it gives you such an insight into what shapes how we think about history. And also there's this challenge when you're writing it into a narrative of how do you create a compelling, coherent narrative with the relatively constrained information that we have.
And I found it really interesting how you utilise those sources throughout the book. And it reminded me of, as you were just speaking there, it reminded me of that, the cliche in history where us modern historians are incredibly jealous that you have a smaller number of sources to work with, but you guys are incredibly jealous of how we have so many. Yeah. Now, this is your first year at Chalke History Festival. You have just flown in this morning. I'm sorry for the beating sun.
It makes it sound a lot more glamorous than it was.
Oh, it's incredibly glamorous. This is
Chalke.
Chalke.
Like I landed my helicopter somewhere on the hill over there.
We can pretend that. Now, what has been your favourite thing that you have seen today at Chalke History Festival, or that you're going to see this afternoon?
I think I've got to say there's an Iron Age round house over there. It's like built from wattle and daub. It's all kitted out inside like it would have been. I think that's really cool.
I think that's a great answer, and they've been building that this week. I think they built it just before they built it just before the festival started.
It's also a lot kind of nicer inside than I would have. Like if you tried to sell me Iron Age round hut as like a living situation, I would have been dubious. But it's really nice inside.
I think we're going to need to find a nice estate agent for you there. But they are actually camping in that this week.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's a lady with kind of full Iron Age get-up. I love it.
I think that's one of my favourite things about Chalke History Festival is there's so much, and all these living historians are absolutely awesome and mental to be doing the things.
I tried some Tudor food earlier as well. That was actually delicious. They had ravioli. I didn't realise that was a Tudor staple. I
think I need to head over there now. But obviously, Messalina is in shops now. How can people grab a copy of Messalina?
So it should be the old cliche in any good bookshop. If it's not, ask them, tell them they've really, really messed up. It's recently came out in paperback. Paperback cover is beautiful. It's also available online. If you have an independent bookshop, obviously, they're brilliant to support.
Well, we'll make sure a link for your book is in the description below.
Thank you.
But then how can people interact with you online if they have any questions?
So I have TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, unfortunately. But I do mainly history content on TikTok as Ancient History Girl.
Oh, awesome. So we'll make sure that's in the description below so people can learn more and possibly interact with your content. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for being such a great interview guest.